Erda City Council. Today is Thursday, June 22nd, 2023 at 7 p.m. We're in the Tooele County Auditorium located at 47 South Main Street, Tooele, Utah. This meeting is being broadcast online over Google Meet and also YouTube. We'll start off with a roll call. Harry Miner.
Here.
Kel Martin.
Here.
Jess Bird is here. Craig Smith. Here. And Scott is delayed. He will be calling in here in a minute if he's not here in time. Okay. It's my turn. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Everybody. Okay, right off the bat, we'll open the meeting to public comment. If you have something to say, please come up and write down your name.
So I'm going to be first. Corey Warnick, I'm an Erda resident, also on the Planning Commission, and this body appointed me to be on the PIT committee. Being on the PIT committee has been quite an experience. I appreciate the opportunity. I think that everybody there has done a great job investing time and resources and energy to make what's there as good as we can in the city. I especially appreciate Craig and John, Alex and Aaron, and Jen especially. Put a lot of time and effort into it. That being said, just because I'm on the committee, I don't want to give the impression that I endorse it. I wanted to make a couple of thoughts, or since I'm on it, I've had time to think about it more and dive in deeper and kind of understand the process. As I've thought about it, Ochre Point has been sold, at least to me, as a solution for people that we love and that we want to live close but can't afford it because of Erda. I'm talking about siblings, kids, parents, and my parents would love to live here, but they can't afford it. I have a sibling who would love to move here. I bet even Kel, probably himself, at some point would love to have a place to stay that's not his parents' house, right? I think all of us have people that fit that category. And so keep that in the back of your mind as I make the rest of my point. When Ochre Point is completed, any home that's sold in there will be sold for market value. And just for argument's sake, for easy math, let's say that's $500,000 for whatever size house. That $500,000 is not going to go down because there's a pit on it. It's not going to go up because there isn't a pit. The developer and the builder are going to get whatever market value is. That being said, that means that this money is coming either from the developer or from the pit, from future taxpayers, right? It's either part of their formula for making the project profitable, or they don't have to worry about it. It's not something they ever have to pay back. It doesn't have to be included in the home sales price. It's essentially money in their pocket. And so, to me, this turns into a rob from the poor now, or no, rob from the, give to the rich now at the expense of the poor later. The people who are living there, when Kale moves in, or when my kids are old enough to move in, or when my sister moves in, they're going to be spent paying back this loan, this tax loan that's secured by being over 30 or 40 years. And I just don't think it's just or fair to push this tax burden to our kids. We've complained for years, I've complained for years and years about how our federal tax debt is going to go to our kids and our grandkids. This is one more example of that. It's not federal, it's a very local level. But we're pushing infrastructure that's there for this development to the next generation or to the people who want to be closer to God. So I'm asking two things. Number one is when the vote on this happens, hopefully in 2 weeks, they vote no. And number two, I would also ask that you repeal that resolution or ordinance that allows for this to happen. So.
Michael Jensen, Erda. So, I'm going to give you an opposite view of what was just said. That is, please don't look at this as a tax, meaning the PID. It's a tool. I want to buy commercial property in Erda, and the chances of that happening without a PID are slim to none. Why? Because if the developer doesn't get a PID, cost is going to skyrocket. So I completely disagree with the analysis of robbing from the poor later. But going into it, I know that I will have to pay for that PID if I buy a piece of property within the PID. And it's going to spread it out over the life of the bond. So from my perspective, it's completely the opposite. It's giving me the opportunity to buy at a lower price now versus likely not being able to buy. Because if the developer doesn't get a PID, if you think that it's going to come out of the developer's pocket, you're kidding yourself. It's going to come out of the pocket of those who buy the land, whether it's now as they buy it or later. And as we've seen time and time again, as we kick the can down the road, what happens? Costs go up, densities go up. It's happened here in Erda many times. I've seen it since I moved here 20 plus years ago. Work with them, help it work out. Please vote for the PID. Because once you buy it, in that PID, it's not a tax. It's just what people want to call it. It's a repayment of a bond to get the infrastructure in so that that development can happen. Commercial property can get here so we can gain more revenue from actual taxes. The money that goes to pay for the PID goes to pay for the bond, not a tax. Thanks.
Aubrey Smith, Erda. So this is more a question that you can maybe answer when you're having your discussion. So just to make sure I understand, this PID and these houses and the prices of these houses, whatever they are when they're completed, the PID is only affecting the people buying those houses. It's only gonna be in Ober Point that the PID price, the PID, the mill levy is applied to only those people, is the way I understand it. That being said, if Kale or anybody's sibling or kids, I got my own kids who I would love to live here someday, my parents, whoever, if they don't want to pay for that PID mill levy, they can buy somewhere else. I just want to make sure that I understand that right. So when you're having your discussion, you could address that. The prices won't be affected outside of
Thank you. Raised hands online.
No other public comment, I move to close public comment.
Second, we close public comment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair moves that we approve minutes, meeting minutes from June 8th, last week. Second. Okay, moved and seconded that we approve these minutes. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, sheriff's report.
Lieutenant Erda with the Sheriff's Office. So I have some report from April also, and the one from May. So your April calls were about 78 people that they did, and 11 arrests and 37 citations. For the month of May, you have a total of 80 details with 7 arrests and 30 citations. And then and the more significant events were like coordinate vandalism, bathrooms by base camp. And so by state has to witness. Okay. The way they're doing more extra patrols on those areas.
Questions? Thank you very much.
That's our clear stuff out of the approved budget, and part of the budget was the taxes, we would certified tax rate that the county develops. And so that happens to be 0.000895. So I spent yesterday logging in, setting up the account, putting this as an entity, approving that rate, so that's what we got. It's the certified tax rate that the county auditor put out, and we accepted that. So now it goes on to whatever else it goes. So that's done. As far as deposits, we had, since the 9th, we had business licenses from the Stripe, $960. Permits, $10,133.50 for a total of $11,093.50 deposits. Checks written. Clerk salary, $1,007.56. Renewal for our liability insurance, Utah Local Government Trust, $4,341. Membership in Utah League of Cities and Towns renewal, $2,110.17. Enzyme Engineering, $427,619. $7,936.25, and renew the fire station, $4,800 for a total of $20,194.98. Fire department. Inside. Have John look at all the things that.
All right, moving on. Resolution number 23-16. Resolution of the Erda City Council approving appointments to the Planning Commission. This is a renewal for Kathleen Malice and Diane Sagers for an additional term of 4 years. Appreciate what they've done so far, and both have accepted, and then extended that invitation and accepted to serve for another 4 years. So I move that we can go ahead and adopt this resolution unless there's any comments or questions.
I appreciate the work they do. The county spent or well, second motion.
Second, to adopt this resolution. We'll proceed to a roll call vote. Get Scott on the phone.
Yeah.
Need his vote. It's full support.
Look, Scott, we're just having a resolution appointing Kathleen and Diane for another 4-year term, ready to vote on.
Okay. I vote in favor.
Thank you, Scott. Craig?
Yes.
Jess votes yes. Gail?
Yes.
And Terry?
Yes.
We have unanimous. You gonna hang on with this, Scott?
Yeah, why don't I? I'm just passing the golf course, but
Okay.
stay on the line until I get there.
Ordinance number 23-06, an ordinance of the Erda City Council regulating, preventing, and banning the discharge of fireworks within the certain areas of the city. I believe this is just a carbon copy of last year. Is that right, John? What are the
Same area.
At same areas? What are the dates? Or is it just, is it a,
Well, you can only discharge fireworks within a certain time period.
so it's during that time period? Or is it always?
Well, it's
Two
supposed
days
to,
before,
if you're outside
2 days
that
after.
time period, you're discharging inappropriately.
All right. All right, good enough. Any questions or comments on this? Ready to vote on it? Chair moves we approve ordinance number 23-06.
Second that one too.
Move in second that we adopt resolution number 23-06. Terry, how do you vote?
Yes.
Gail?
Yes.
Yes, votes yes. Craig?
Yes.
And Scott?
I'm yes.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, everybody. Unanimous approval. Okay, ordinance number 23-05. A rezone. Ordinance rezone 2 acres at 5382 North SR 36, parcel number 01-411-0-0002 from A20 agricultural to CG commercial general. All
Thank you,
yours,
Chairman and
Michelle.
council members. Ms. Adams is requesting to rezone 2 acres at 5382 North Highway 36 from 820, which is agricultural 20-acre lots, to commercial general. It's currently only 2 acres, so it is a non-conforming lot size within that zoning district. The general plan calls for commercial uses along Highway 36, so this is in conformance with the general plan. The property is currently accessed from SR 36, and we requested that the applicant receive permission from UDOT to continue using that access with the change of use. We do have a letter from UDOT stating that they would approve that access unless they get an increased amount of commercial traffic, then they will have to rezone it. There's currently one structure on the property that is being used for commercial uses that they would like to subdivide off and subdivide the back property off for another commercial business. There is one house on the property that will become legal non-conforming once it becomes a commercial general zoning district. And we have received a letter from the property owner stating that she is aware it's a legal non-conforming use once the zone is changed, and that she will not be able to expand or do any additions to it. So that was the only recommendation that staff had from the planning commission, was that we received that letter, and that letter was received today. The planning commission did make a unanimous favorable recommendation to it. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and the applicant is here if you have any questions about it.
I don't have any questions. Anybody else?
Jim, help me understand exactly where that is.
It's Bob and Renee Vanderhook's old property,
Oh, okay.
By
Right
Adobe's
on,
pit.
smack on the highway.
right on the highway, yes.
Okay.
Unless you have anything else for us, I think we'll take this to a vote.
I do have one question. So would your recommendation be that we also, the letter of acknowledgement, do we put that in our motion, or is it there, done, we have it, doesn't matter now?
I have received an email from her. I do not have the formal letter. You're welcome to add that in the motion if you would like, but that will be on file with this reading.
I'll word a motion that way.
I'll second.
All right, I move that we adopt ordinance 23-05, rezoning 2 acres from A20 to commercial general, with the condition that the owner submit a letter acknowledging that the home will be a non-conforming use and cannot be expanded.
I'll second that. Moved and seconded that we adopt ordinance number 23-05 as amended. Any further comments, questions, or discussion? Right. We're voting on the rezone. Scott, how do you vote?
Oh, yeah.
Craig?
Yes.
Jess votes yes. Kale?
Yes.
Terry? All right. This, approval of this ordinance. Okay. We now open the meeting up to the Ogre Point PID governing documents discussion. It's like Donald.
Yeah, okay, I'll read off. So we prepared issue summary for you to look at. And this is based upon the current configuration of the governing documents. Doesn't mean you have to adopt them, but this is just telling you what's in there, and also raise some issues for you to decide, that you can decide on. And then when we get through with, I guess Marcus or Aaron is going to run through most of this stuff. I'd like to make a couple of comments, things that I thought I've heard from the council that have not found their way into these governing documents. So, Aaron?
And if you want to get there as well, Marcus. That's great. All right, so we've put together, just a summary that I know was in the agenda packet, and I think also separately went around to the council members. And then following up on that, just a few issues that, the district advisory committee that we've been meeting with. Oh, please go ahead.
What was your name and where are you from?
Yeah, sorry. Aaron Wade with Gilmore and Bell. So we've been acting as counsel to the city through this creation process. So we've been working very closely with John and Jennifer and Craig and Corey and others on the district advisory committee that you put together, trying to reflect the understanding of the council, the requests of the applicant, and just trying to make something that's workable going forward. So we've put together a summary here. Happy to talk about anything not on the summary as well. But just wanted to work through those items first. I think the first thing that, it's not first on the list, but I think probably the biggest thing to talk about here today is the proposed mill levy, the proposed taxes of the PID, hopefully address the questions that have been raised, and then also hoping to get an understanding of if the council supports a tax rate, and if so, what that rate would look like, right? Something that if you would like a tax rate, what rate would you consider for approval? So I think that's the biggest thing. The first thing I want to address is the question that was asked today about the tax and its impact on neighboring properties. So that answer is really clear. The PID can only tax property within its boundaries. So it can't reach across the street and grab property not in the PID. It's not going to affect residents that are your long-term residents that don't live within the PID. What the applicant is requesting is initially very small boundaries, lot size or smaller initial boundaries, but that as the development plans and as their build-out plans come together, they would take those very small districts and expand them to match their phasing requirements. So that's something that the governing document, as currently written, would authorize. And the city would basically be giving pre-approval to the greater PID boundaries, which is something like 850 acres of, that includes the Ogre Point, the Erda estates,
I think it's called, the drive-in property. You guys are probably more familiar with it, but those are the different parcels as I understand them. But the requirements placed on that annexation is, into the district, is that property that gets annexed would have to have some kind of an approved development plan or development agreement before the district could expand. So the area currently covered by the existing development agreement, they could expand the PID boundaries within those boundaries today, or once they're created. And then the other areas, they couldn't do anything until they come back to the city and get a development agreement of some kind. But only those areas that have been annexed would be subject to the tax. The other thing I want to point out on the annexation area, it's a big area. Today it has a lot of different property owners, but an annexation can only occur if the property owner at the time of the annexation consents. So the person who's maybe farming that land today, they may be saying, I'm in this annexation area, what does that mean to me? They would not be taxed unless they sign a consent and bring their property in, or they sell their property to someone who signs a consent and the district approves bringing it in. So those are the guardrails. Yes, please.
Say that farmer sells his property, and of course you want the buyer to sign that consent. Is there any compulsory action on that? Do they have to sign that consent, or can they decline?
No, the statute says that it has to be with 100% consent. I mean, so I'm not a real property attorney. I mean, if it was a condition to the closing, then they could say, well, I can't close if you don't meet my condition. But my thought would be, the seller would probably say, once it's not mine, I kind of don't care what you do with it, right? It's not my problem anymore. So I would think unless they made it the selling point, you're not going to have that be a kind of a gun to the head situation.
Did you say 100% had approved? So if you have 5 owners and they were all in an annexation, would all 5 have to approve a bid before bids even allowed?
So they would.
Could 4 out of 5 do it?
So it could only move if say you had 4 out of 5, you would just put the PID on the 4 properties, and the 5th property wouldn't have the PID on. So they likely wouldn't participate in the infrastructure. They might not get the sewer line to their property line, but they also wouldn't have the tax on it.
The final pit area may have some holes in it.
Yeah, it could be a little bit of a Swiss cheese, or you might have, for instance, a lot of times we have public right-of-ways are not in the PID because they don't want to come to the city and get consent because you're not going to pay a tax anyways. So just, but the statute is explicit that the property boundaries do not need to be contiguous. So generally it makes sense for properties to be in proximity, but they not a requirement.
Just for the record, if someone chose not to come into the PID, which they could choose not to, but wanted to hook to the infrastructure, they still could, but they would have to pay for their portion of the infrastructure, correct?
So that's the intent. So I think that additional actions of the city would have to be taken to, like a pioneering agreement, a connectors agreement, something like that. I think would need to be entered into with the city and the district, where other properties are put on notice that I can't just tie in and be scot-free on this. So that's the intent. That's what we would hope, and then that would help lessen the ultimate tax burden on the inhabitants of the PID, because the guy next door doesn't want to join the PID. He pays per lot or ERU or whatever kind of metric you guys design to make sure he's paying his fair share. And so that, that's the clarification. Yeah, please.
Clear that we're not in the sewer or the water business, so it's really not our call.
That's being discussed with the development agreements on how to make sure that if people are part of the PID and paying for infrastructure, that people can't just say, well, we're just going to wait for you guys to pay for it, then we'll connect on. So SPID agrees, well, that doesn't seem fair. So if there is somebody that connects on at that point, then the money would go to pay down the bonds associated with the PID, so that people within that area would get a reduced cost on their burden. So because they're the ones financing the infrastructure, so they should receive the benefit if other people connect to it at a later date. Now that's usually capped, and sometimes that's 5 years, sometimes that's 10 ye's. So that portion's still in flux on what's a fair assumption, but it's usually long enough so that if anybody had plans to do it and they're just saying, well, I'll just delay for them to pay for it and then me get a free ride that would capture those people. But if somebody were to come in, 11 years down the road, they probably didn't have any intention to, game the system or something. So it's just a little bit of a give and take on that, on what's a fair or appropriate level of time period there too, for that pioneering agreement.
And we do see some of those go for the whole life.
Or it could go for the whole life,
Just so
whatever
that-
spit feels like it's fair.
And so that's kind of just some background, I guess, on who would be taxed, who won't be taxed, and kind of those related questions. I think the other issue that John wanted to flag is, whether or not the intent of the council was to allow for taxing of residential properties. My understanding was that the council amended their PID policy to allow for taxing of residential properties, and that this application was submitted in conjunction with that. I could be wrong on that, but I believe
There's
that
a cap on the mill levy, I don't remember what it is.
I believe it's 5 mils. Yeah, I believe it's 5 mils for residential property, and 10 for commercial properties. And maybe there's like I can't remember if there's a mixed use exception, but so what the applicant has requested is 5 mils for their residential districts, 10 mils for their commercial districts. And the bootstraps that we put into the governing document is that the city reserves the right to not rezone any property within a commercial district to residential uses if they're levying 10 mils. It's the classic case of you have a developer come in and say, don't worry, this is all commercial, just give me all commercial. You zone it commercial, he puts 10 mils on it. 2 years later, I can't get the target to come, just let me build houses. And you're saying, it's right here. We're not going to do it because your tax rate's too high. And so the recommendation we've also had and spoken with John is, that an amendment would happen with the development agreement that would put that language in there as well. So it's just understanding from day one. I guess we're past day one, but from here forward, that they're not going to come and ask for a rezone to try to put residential property with a higher tax rate. So those are the levy limits of your policy. That's what the applicant has asked for. But I think something that was really important to the district advisory committee was getting an understanding of what your thoughts were on those levels. And I think something that we asked of the applicant and their consultants is to come prepared to talk about those limits and help you understand what they mean, what they mean in relation to the bonds, the tax owner. So I think we can give them some time to answer any questions that you guys have with respect to tax rate, or if you guys want to tell me tax rate's off the table, then save that time if that's the understanding that you have.
Hi, Marcus Keller with Cruz and Associates. We're working on behalf of the PID team to answer any questions tonight. This is Sam Elder.
I am from DA Davidson. We would be acting as underwriter to the debt.
And then I believe we have Daryl on the phone. Do we have a call in?
Daryl Anderson is here.
Yeah. So Daryl, the developer team, unfortunately, they wanted to be here today. They're planning to be here on July 13th to obviously answer any additional questions, prepare more information as well. But there was some traveling conflicts with the 4th of July coming up here that kind of took some people away. But we're here to answer any questions. I know Aaron did a good job in describing the mill levy, helping everybody understand, answering the question that no one will involuntarily be associated to this PID. So either it will be 100% consent to be in the PID, or you'll receive notices that you are moving into a PID and would have the extra increase on your property as you pay your taxes through your property tax bill and so forth. So that would be kind of the clarifier there. So hopefully that was crystal clear on that front. Was there any additional questions? I know there's some mill levy concerns.
What benefit does the city have?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think some of the benefit, it just depends on what the city's really wanting. I know a portion of this, they've discussed some of the parks, they've discussed the 33rd Parkway, building the intersection, preparing it so that you can have commercial properties come in sooner. I think the reality of this, and maybe just to kind of take a look at it from a macro approach, is that without the PID, this area is not gonna develop because of the massive amount of regional infrastructure needed from STID to run the lines, or it's gonna be very piecemeal, and that alone, and I can't speak for STID, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but the way that they have to bring in that infrastructure, it's gonna have to be piecemeal, so you can do the closest to it, and then eventually it may grow out to that point, but you're not gonna get the development perhaps that you want or that you're hoping for. It maybe have to have more multifamily or whatever it is. But in long story short, it's gonna very much delay if people are wanting to have relatives, affordable housing, or at least at the very instance, more supply within Erda City and the availability of more commercial within this area. It's gonna delay that maybe indefinitely.
And you said the key word is affordable.
Yeah.
If it's affordable, then the people would move here. If we're saying, no, we want to have high priced ones, if you can't afford it, get out. I mean, I think we want more an affordable house that draws people in, not a high price stay.
I think the current development plan, and that's one of the things that can be agreed upon in a development agreement, right, what you want to see come within Erda. As far as this mechanism, it's just a financing tool to enable that development to happen in the way that you want to see it. They are going to have mixed use, so there'll be affordable housing within this community. I mean, the average home may be somewhere in the $400,000 range or something like that based on the proposed plans today. And so this is really just a mechanism to help finance infrastructure at a cheaper form of capital. If the developer was having to go and source this in the private capital markets today, which are very difficult, they would get a lot higher rates. It would make the project harder to pencil, meaning to be able to bring all those offsite utilities and whatnot to the site. Currently, to date, there's not a lot of infrastructure out here, and so you got to move that infrastructure a long distance. Plus, they want to put in, a public park and other public amenities. So how we've seen these tools be utilized, especially when it talks or relates to the property tax, is that property tax can only be really used for, to help cover these offsite infrastructure and public amenities, not for the actual roads to the homes, right? And so if you look at kind of what the property tax bond can generate in net proceeds, it only covers a small portion of the overall, let's call it $34 million offsite infrastructure cost. And what I can see and what I've known based on, the number of projects that we've worked on, but having a $34 million offsite infrastructure cost, or a big portion of that, a big portion of that 34 million having to be put in before you can deliver one unit is really difficult to get financing on.
Yeah, but before 2019, that was the one thing that the developer was always responsible for, was out of his pocket, was the infrastructure. Now with PID, that takes that out of the pocket.
It's still something that they're self-financing, right? When they sell a home, they have to sell a home with an extra property tax similar to someone who has a higher HOA in their houses. And so it is all disclosed to the home buyer that they are buying. If some property comes in adjacent to it and doesn't have it, they're gonna have to compete against that property that doesn't have an extra property tax. It is, and in 2019, I totally agree that the market conditions were entirely different. These types of tools are being utilized in the state. They've been utilized for decades in other states as a way to help bridge infrastructure gaps and projects. And I can say that the financing world that existed in 2019 is non-existent today.
Well, that's why they did the statute, was in 2015, create the PID, do that.
Kind of give them that extra buffer to help them to
Speed up.
It is to try to help speed up the process, right, so that you can deliver more supply into the market. Because the ultimate problem, and I think we all know this, is the fundamentals, is supply and demand. And we have too big of a demand for the amount of supply that we have in the state, and we need to produce more homes. And this gives us an incentive to help do that. It may not be someone's perfect solution, but it is a solution that hasn't existed before and gives an opportunity for a public-private partnership.
And just to put it into context too, on a $400,000 home, primary residential home, we think the monthly payment at the max, there's no guarantee that the developer would even go all the way to the max. He may only use 3 mills or 4 mills, depending on what market conditions and how much revenue he can generate for those offsite improvements. But I think it comes out, I think it was about $92 a month of what additional payments someone would pay to move into a $400,000 home, in which there's $4,000.
And just to add some clarity, because I think this is an important concept. is that when we go and we bond to raise capital, you put a mill rate, let's say we put 5 mills on the property of a $400,000 home, and it was a $92 a month payment, right, in retrospect. What we do is we project that the development is gonna happen as is, right? That's a big risk. So the interest rate that investors will lend at is higher at the time that we go to market. But when homeowners start to move in, and there's multiple homeowners paying property taxes, the credit becomes strong, similar to our own personal credit ratings. So we can go and refinance the debt at lower rates and lower the mill rate. That always happens, right? Regardless of market conditions, meaning even if rates go up, the credit profile becomes strong where we'll go refinance it and lower the mill rate at some point in time. So even though it's $92 today, it could be less than that, or 5 mills today, it could be 3 mills in 5 years, right? So that's what naturally happens. More importantly, with the impact fees, right, being remitted back to the PID to help pay the bonds down, that also will go to help decrease the mill rate as well. So as future users of the infrastructure that gets put in from the PID gets reimbursed back to them, the impact fees get reimbursed back to them, it will actually either turbo the bonds to make them pay faster or reduce the mill levy. And that will be a decision that the future PID board owners will make, and that will be the future homeowners of the district.
I guess in summary on the mill levy, just before we turn it back for you guys for any other questions on the summary sheet you have before you, it's, I mean, the reality is, if they can get the mill levy, they can pay for the offsite improvements, it's gonna help build that development as described, which I think the city, does the city want it, may or may not want it, right? I mean, I think that's the question you guys have as presented. Do we want the extra supply? Do we want it based off this phasing map? Do we want it in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Or if not, then I think they kind of have to scratch it and say, hey, right now, with the Fed doing what the Fed's doing and the higher interest rates in the commercial market, this project isn't feasible. We can't afford to bring X amount of millions of dollars of upfront cash to bring SPID into the game and what they need to service this area. And so they're just gonna have to sit on it until either market conditions improve or something, the Fed stops hurting us. So I mean, just kind of put in summary, I think that's the scenario. I don't envision that being any different, but maybe you guys see it differently, but that's how we've seen it. That's how we've looked at it as far as the phasing goes. And we think Erda could use additional supply at a sooner rate versus, some maybe piecemeal metric that may be affordable as they can build as close as they can to SPID and then slowly start running lines out little by little.
SPID though is the city of Erda super water. They're their own entity. We may one day have our own.
Correct.
Real estate.
Yeah, and we're not trying to say that, the city is gonna use SPID. I'm not speaking on behalf of SPID. I think that's who they looked at right now, just because it seems to be the most viable partner based off what the city may or may want to do. But yeah, absolutely what you said, water and sewer, that's definitely the city's prerogative to supply those services or do, however you'd like to handle those additional enterprise funds. So I apologize. I don't want you to think we're saying one way or another on what you guys have to do.
Yeah, the infrastructure could be needed to any local entity that can service it.
Right now, we're kind of just general contractor. Hopefully one day,
Yeah.
the city and have our own stuff.
Well, and that's what
the
those
goal.
commercials and houses will do, right? So, is there any questions on the mill levy? Did we adequately, at the very least, help explain it so that at least it gives you a better idea on, as you're preparing for that July 13th meeting? Or as Aaron mentioned, is there any feedback at this time? I mean, our goal is to obviously, try to get an agreement in place, a governing document in place that the city wants, that will approve, that you're happy with. And so any feedback you can give us either on the mill levy, anything else on the documentation that John handed out in the summary, we're here to get that feedback today so we can make changes over the next week or through an email through John Bridge at some point as well.
John, according to the summary and the governing document, how does it stack up to the policy? Is it deficient? Does it match closely? Does it go all the way to the maximums that we've allotted?
Well, it goes to the maximum on the mill levies. Can I go to a couple more issues? I think I might have actually answered your question. If you're looking for affordable housing, we would need to amend the Oak Point Development Agreement. It's not in there. And so you'd have to push that down on them. That's pretty complicated and to do, but it's doable. Second, all the other subdivisions are gonna have to enter into development agreements with the city to move forward. That would be Erda Estates. What are the other ones? Kelpie Village. Those would have to do development agreements to come into this pit. And then the last thing is I hate to beat this dead horse, but I thought I had heard from this council that when it comes to residential, that you would want to do an assessment bond, which is different than the mill levy bond. The mill levy is a tax that goes on for 20 or 30 years. The assessment bond is paid off at basically building permit or plat. That didn't make it. It's not in these governing pit. It's in there fuzzily. We may do it, we may not do it. If you want to do it, we have to put it in there.
It was not written, but the mill levy was allowed in our our pit policy. And so it's perfectly legitimate to ask for it.
Well, it's, if I'm them, I'm asking for it. But if I'm the city, I just wanted to let you know that that was not in there.
So how would that work? Instead of a mill levy, you have.
Well, okay, so you put this into two buckets, so to speak. If it's commercial, you could put that mill levy in place. So commercial has the tax, it goes up for 20 or 30 years, the equivalent of tax. And then in the residential bucket, you can put this assessment on. And they're paid off before the people move into the house. So it's not an ongoing.
So they have to come up with that sum of money right up front, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be in the price of the house.
That would be a lot, wouldn't it?
So, well,
I don't know,
So a couple of things just to point out. I mean, so to John's point, the requirement that an assessment, if used, gets paid off at building permit is in the document. So that's a requirement, but the document doesn't mandate that they issue assessment bonds. It allows them to issue property tax bonds, in compliance with the policy. The piece to your point about how much is the payoff, it would be a lot. So state law limits the amount of assessment bonds that you can issue to 1/3 of the appraised value of the lot upon completion of the improvements. So it's not just a raw ground analysis, but it's once we put in the sewer line, once we put in the roads, the sidewalks, whatever's being financed, what's the value of the property? So that's gonna, finished lot value. You can borrow up to 1/3 of that. So that is a statutory cap. So I think that's where the limitation, I'll let these guys speak to that, but I think that's why there's the push for the property tax, is that the assessments alone would not be enough to cover the offsite improvements. So the idea would be finance the localized improvements through the assessment bond. And you'd say, oh, well, everybody gets their sidewalks and their roads paid for when they buy a house. And that would be the case with this. They would move in, or when they pull the building permit, the home builder, they pay off the assessment. So the owner would move in with the tax, but with no assessment burden. And so the developer would get that upfront funding, help bridge that gap, but ultimately would not pass that one on to
Is there verbiage in there that restricts the PID committee from allowing both an assessment and a mill levy at the same time?
So there is not a limitation, and the reason for that is because of the prepayment requirement. So while there's both on there, it's only going to be the bulk landowner and any like home builder. So let's say Ivan Homes came in and said, I'd like 100 lots. Ivan Homes could have the assessments and live with those until they sell the lots, but they couldn't sell a lot to me and keep the assessment on. So by the time it gets to the ultimate user, that lien and that assessment.
Just to add some clarification, it's like any construction loan where you borrow the money, you put in the infrastructure, and then when you sell a lot, you pay down some of the lot, right? So nothing gets passed on to that individual lot. So.
My concern is that, the family sits down at the closing table and they find that they're having to finance an immediate assessment in addition to a long-term mill levy.
Well, yeah, the
Is
assessment,
there anything that prevents that from happening?
yeah, the assessment cannot be passed on to the homeowner, so they cannot see that there's an assessment.
Oh, I see, it's on
He has
the
to
bill.
pay that off prior to, so if we hold to that building permit, before he actually builds his home, the home, right, it's paid
It's
off.
already paid off.
Yeah,
I
so we
understand.
can't pass anything on to a future homeowner for an assessment.
And the point that I want to make is, if you want to do the assessment, you gotta mandate it. If that says in there, they can, but they're not going to. Because they need more money.
We want the ability to choose to issue a special assessment bond or not, right? If it doesn't make sense to issue the special assessment bond, they won't do it, right? If it doesn't make sense to issue the property tax bond, they won't do it. It's gonna be a financing decision one way or another.
I just want to bring that to your attention. Then we also have a provision in here that requires, before they borrow so much money, they have to make the improvements to
33rd Parkway.
33rd Parkway,
Yeah.
so that they don't build all the houses with no improvements to the road.
Yes.
Now, we certainly are gonna have some affordable housing mandates coming up.
I thought the development agreement had a minimum of 10% affordable housing in it.
In the development agreement, not
Yeah.
PID, nothing to do with the PID, but
It's not a PID policy issue.
Yeah, but the development agreement we currently have already mandates 10% affordable.
Okay, look, I can't remember what I had for breakfast.
That's all right.
And if that's something that the city council is, adamant, I mean, again, that's one of the tools that the city council can use to say, we're willing to give you this, but we want to see this in return. I mean, that can be dictated in the development agreement. Typically, that's where we usually skip because they're not gonna be able to do anything or get their entitlements or anything else without that agreement in place. So, this is the kind of feedback we want, because that's where we can go back and say, okay, this is what they need to get them comfortable or get them from, A to Z type situation. So please, let us know those situations or those things that are really concerning to the city.
Commercial is a lot more favorable than the city, isn't it?
Well,
There's a lot more money on commercial than you do residential. Just gotta look at your property tax and find out how much goes to the city development.
The point of sale is helping though, right? All those Amazon clicks are at least helping, I hope. So I think to their point, so the big thing that Dak was looking for is we're like, what should the limit be? And I know we're not voting today, but I think it would make the decision, in a couple of weeks easier if the DAC has guidance from the council, maybe on I don't know how you would handle it, but on an informal basis of, if we come back with 5 mills, how do people feel about that, I guess? I think now's the best time, so that we're not sitting here trying to rewrite the document in 3 weeks when we could have been doing it, over the course of time.
But, so to be fair, I think you've already given us direction. Opinion, 5 and 10%, or 5 and 10 mils. The question is, what do you want to do with the assessment? That's my thing.
So my gut feeling is that they will use the mill levy and assessment bonds. There's so much infrastructure there to do that the mill levy will go to pay for water tank, water line, well, sewer lines there, 33rd Parkway, the intersection. That's where the mill levy money goes. Then they'll use special assessment bonds for building inside. I can't see a scenario where they don't use both of them. But I don't think anyone has much of a problem with assessment costs, because they do get paid off before they ever go to an end user. It's, I think the mill levies are the bigger hiccup. I just look at the commercial, I know without it, they're gonna do everything they can as cheaply as possible, which means they start building homes on Erda Way and slowly piecemeal their way through, and that commercial's not covered for a long, long time. But with the PID, we can mandate that 33rd Parkway intersection. Even if we don't mandate they build the whole road, they can build the intersection, that first section in the frontage road, so that the commercial's there.
If you notice in the phasing on the capital stack, that's in phase one to do that intersection. And so they understand that that's important to the city to have that commercial up and going, because that, as mentioned, that's your kind of lifeblood for a city, it's your sales tax.
And that's one of the things the committee put in there, that intersection of 33rd Parkway gets done. But they don't, it doesn't wait until the end, and then they say we're out of money. About halfway through, they have to fund it.
And that halfway point was by design too, so that we don't have a road getting built that somebody has to maintain it, you know, before it's due date, when probably sewer and other improvements are a little bit more pressing, so.
Questions, comments, further direction?
And I think, just real quick, there's a few other items on the summary. Like I said, the tax was the big one, but I just wanted to cover a few things that were important to the DAC. So we talked about the main financing tools here, which is the limited tax, the property tax, the special assessments. The other item that's in there is, you'll notice it's called CPACE assessments. So that's commercial property assessed clean energy. It's a legislation the state passed a while back. It would basically allow commercial property owners, if they wanted to, again, it's a consent thing, to finance energy efficient upgrades to their buildings with a governmental lien. And that it would allow the district basically to put that lien in place, but it's still just, usually the property owner just assigns it to like a commercial bank to hold the debt. And it's really more like a private loan, but it's given the governmental lien to incentivize, just because there's not a lot of incentives out there for lenders to lend for enhancements for clean energy. So that's something that the district would be allowed to do. It wouldn't affect the homeowners because it's not allowed for residential property, but I was just asked to explain that provision to the group. Sorry, I just want to make sure we cover all of this. I think the last item in there was just, the districts asked that they can hire their own professionals. I don't know, is Alex on the phone or Jonathan Ward? Are either of them shown as in the lobby?
No.
Okay. I spoke to Alex before. He understands that the district is likely to want to choose their own advisors. He understands that. He just wanted to make sure everybody was just aware that, anticipate an invoice for the time that he's put in. I think we'll do the same thing. And we'll send that invoice into the applicant, and they've agreed to pay that in their petition that they submitted. So just wanted to put people on notice for that. Alex couldn't make it today, but wanted to cover that. So any other questions before I sit down and stop talking during your meeting here?
Just one last quick thing, if I could. We just wanted to make sure that any concerns that the city council has that we can address, let us address them. Let us get them in the governing document. We try to be responsive to every concern or issue that has been brought up to date. If there's something that you guys want to see, we want to get it in the documents, right? And find a way to make this a public-private partnership. That's the goal of these tools. We actually want to do that. We've been extremely responsive in trying to provide that. And so if there's something that you guys want to see, let us know. We got the responses back from the DAC. We came back with, accepting some of those and all the changes in the governing document that were requested. And here we come to address those items. So we do want to answer these questions. We do want it to make sense for the council and for the city and for the development.
Sorry, just one last question, sorry, if you want to be in the city. Are you guys okay with us, me working with Jennifer to publish notice of a public hearing for the 13th? We just have a 14-day lead requirement on that under state law, so if you guys are okay with moving forward with this on the 13th agenda, I'll work with Jennifer.
So Craig, your memory's pretty good. We have in the development agreement with Open Point that at least 10% of the residential units, about 126 units, will be moderate income housing. Not necessarily low, but moderate. So, kudos to you.
Whatever that means in their formula.
Yeah.
I think the overreaching question is what language we want on a mill levy. Our policy allows 5 and 10, and that's what they asked for. Is that something that this council will allow? Or is there a different number that we're more comfortable with? I think that's what they're asking more than anything is, can we get some of those answers and have draft?
It seems logical. 5 mils. Especially when they said 5 mil ends up being $92 a month. On a $400,000 home. My son just built, it's a little bit more than 400,000. He had to also come up with about 75 grand, put in infrastructure that now will be covered by this bid. So I think 5 mils makes perfect sense. He's paying a lot more than $95 a month for the infrastructure he had. That seems like a pretty good assessment to me.
To Corey's point, he's largely right. They're gonna sell their homes at market value. But let's not say they're not going to, because they're gonna get everything they can out of every house. That's part of the world of being a contractor or developer. And they will sell at market price, but if there's a mill levy against it, their market value will be less than a home without a mill levy. That's something that's disclosed, that's something that when you buy a house, they go through to see how much you can afford, and at the end of the day, what your taxes are, what your out-of-pocket fees for everything, that's all added up and put into your mortgage. It's not something that's, in hindsight, oh yeah, you signed, and by the way, now you have to pay this extra money. They check to make sure you can pay the money upfront. And when that $92 every month is on your mortgage to pay the taxes, that devalued your house by whatever value that $92 a month is. If you buy one that somewhere doesn't have a bid and get that extra value. So I think it does, they'll sell the market value, but having it in there devalues their property.
You know, it's pay off your bid.
The good, I guess the good thing on that though is it's the same as like the city and the county's rate. Is the property tax can be delinquent for 5 years before foreclosure. So somebody just forgetting to put a check in the mail won't lose their house, but somebody forgetting for 5 consecutive years to put the check in the mail, will. The same as the county will come.
Well, bondholders cannot foreclose on the house, that's the key thing, right? County treasurer can foreclose with 5 consecutive years of delinquencies on your taxes, similar to any other thing. So if someone's delinquent on this tax, they're gonna be delinquent on their county.
If you don't pay your taxes, your house will get foreclosed on, but if you don't pay your mortgage, it'll get foreclosed on within months. They won't wait years.
Well, that's a lot more money than the bid. It's not that much. It's a pretty small amount you can be foreclosed on.
And same is true on the assessment bond. If the landowner doesn't pay their assessments, the foreclosure remedy can be much shorter too. So usually that's more like a 6-month remedy because it is a land secured piece. But again, that doesn't get passed on to me or this, the cousins, the children we kind of talked about wanting to move in. That would just sit with the landowner.
Voted against our bid policy because it allowed for many things, but the main reason was the 5 mil levy on the residential buyers. I've not changed my mind on that.
What do you think it should be?
0. We've done development for hundreds of years in Utah. All of a sudden, 2019 comes and there's only one way to finance a development. And I agree, it has all sorts of benefits. You get all kinds of things immediately. You don't get it built piecemeal. Definitely some benefits there. It goes against what I firmly believe, and that is that this is it's an addition of a creation of a taxing entity. It's an expansion of the size and scope of the government. It is something that a lot of new home buyers are not going to understand. So we're arguing back and forth what the market value will be when it's purchased. Craig is definitely right that it is going to affect that price somewhat. But I also think my friend Corey there is right also, that it's going to an uneducated buyer, first time buyer, it's going to look like kind of a steal of a deal. They'll be shocked by the added expense still because of their revenue. And so, yeah, I'll be, unless I don't like the mill levy on the commercial as well. I might be able to hold my nose and vote yes on it if the residential mill levy was 0. It doesn't sound like that's even feasible or possible. So I expect to be voting no.
I'd like to see the levy on the president lowered. Maybe not 0, but at least lowered.
Yeah, we said something in our policy, the maximum was 5.
That's kind of
If we had done 10, maybe it would have been 10.
worst case scenario. I would go, in my opinion. You guys
go, please.
What kind of number on the levy do you think?
3.
There, you got anything to add? Okay, I think that's the best direction we can give you at this point.
Thank you. We really appreciate the feedback. I think that's going to be helpful as we get ready.
We're happy to continue to, keep the lines of communication open. You communicate with John. I feel like he has an understanding. He does his best to kind of amalgamate the feelings of the council and direct as well, and I think he does an excellent job of that. So that's where we're at.
I guess one question I have before we leave is, because the 5, just because of the massive amount of the 35 to 4 million of anticipated offsite with utilities and everything else, kind of as part of that calculation. Obviously, I know most people are kind of where they're at, so some discussion may not be necessary, but, if the developer were to say, well, hey, affordable housing, not moderate housing, really is important to the city, if we can include additional affordable housing, either a percentage or change some of that language. I mean, does that maybe get us back to the point where the people that truly need affordable housing that move into that area would be benefiting from it, whereas, maybe not everyone, but it kind of comes back to, is there anything in your mind that would kind of get us to that 5 mills, either affordable housing or whatever that may be? Does that make sense, that question, kind of to say?
Look at it harder.
Yeah.
Me as well.
Okay, so if we can kind of put our heads together, talk with the developer team and say, hey, what can we really do to help get that piece of the demographic some help? And then come back on July 13th with kind of that updated plan. Okay, thank you.
My concern on affordable housing strictly federal minimum mandates. I would want to be.
We can't hear you back here.
So my concern on the affordable housing would be limited to whatever the federal government mandates.
And maybe there's some ways we can get creative to solve that too. I know in other places we've looked at perhaps housing that's affordable with the average salaries for teachers, firefighters, policemen, kind of public works, or not public works, but kind of those areas. So that might be a compromise as well. So let us put our heads together and see if we can.
It'd be a good idea to just revisit that minimum. I know we looked at it a while back, but we didn't fit the requirements at that point. We will soon be heading into some of those stricter requirements.
Okay, perfect. Thank you guys so much. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time.
All right, are we okay to move on? Any objections? All right. Should we toss a coin? You know, we've heard from you, I think, 2 or 3 meetings in a row. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to give Brady first shot. Sure. All right, we'll move on to the flagpole discussion for up to 3.
Thank you, Chair and Council for hearing this. Coming here to talk a little bit about the flagpole that's been erected right across the street from the airport.
Can you state who you are and where you're
Oh,
from?
sorry, yeah, sorry. Brady Ferguson, I'm the Director of Planning for the Salt Lake City Department of Airports. I'm here to respectfully request that the requirement and the code be enforced for a conditional use permit for this flagpole. We've read the code, it seems pretty clear that the Coons family needed a conditional use and they didn't get it. Okay, why are we so upset, or why are we so concerned about this flagpole? Well, I'm going to just give you the documentation that the Coons family has submitted to the FAA. Okay, they may have not known that they needed a conditional use permit. They may have not read the code. I've heard them interpret the code and talk about the difference between a structure and a building. But they seem, and they've submitted 2 required permits or studies from the FAA. As you'll see in your packet, there's a map that shows 2 yellow dots. The 2 yellow dots indicate 2 different aeronautical studies, like what they're called 7460s. It's all FAA terms. They're basically an aeronautical study to see if a structure or an antenna, flagpole, something similar actually would pose a hazard to the airspace around the airport. Okay, they submitted 2 last summer. And you can see on the documentation that I gave you, the FAA actually issued the Coons family in January a preliminary finding, okay? On the 120-foot flagpole, if you can see in the back, it says that anything above 72 feet would be deemed a hazard. Well, Coons family didn't put in the 120-foot flagpole, which was actually just east of their property. What they did do is they submitted they went with the second site, which was 1,000 feet closer to the runway, and they put up an 80-foot flagpole. Okay, you can see in the document here, on it's very clear. The FAA came back with the preliminary finding and said any height exceeding 61 feet above the ground will result in substantial adverse effect and would warrant a determination of hazard to air navigation. Okay, those are serious things, right? We are closing the runway at night, every night from dusk till dawn, because this is a hazard. You see the documentation right here. Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? Why do we care that the airport's closed at night? Well, let's talk about that. This morning I had a conversation with a lady who has a hangar there. She's like, I'm moving to Oshkosh in a couple of weeks. I want to leave at 5 a.m. I'm like, no, you're not leaving at 5 a.m. You can't leave at 5 a.m. The runway is closed because this hazard is off the end of the runway. The runway is closed. You know, those things, they're inconveniences. I want to remind you that the BLM operates a base here in the summer. The Bureau of Land Management operates a seat base. It's a single engine aerial attack. They're the firefighting planes. Okay, what happens now? Okay, that base is closed from dusk until dawn. So what they're doing is they're supporting frontline firefighters who are protecting our land, our property from wildfires. So what you're saying here is, okay, this flagpole that is knowingly erected, that is a hazard, knowingly, that person that's up there, the jumpers on the front line who desperately want that aerial attack, that plane's on the ground because the runway is closed from dusk until dawn. They have to wait. If it's at night, they have to get back to the base before it closes, right? That support won't be there during the overnight hours. Okay. The other thing that we did say, that's a serious thing. That actually is putting lives in danger. It's not just the lives of every day of the users of the airport who are really the ones affected. As me as the Department of Airports, you know, I need to protect the airport, I'm trying here, but the users are the ones that are actually be more affected by this hazard. I also talked to the Apache and the Black Hawk helicopter pilots from the Guard. I was there at South Valley Regional Airport the other day, and I said, how's this affecting you guys? They said, well, daytime is fine, but we've had to actually divert a few operations down to Nephi because the flagpole's up, the airport, the runway's closed. Okay, so what we're saying here is, okay, the Coons family's trying to interpret the zoning code that as a city is required to be enforced. Well, we can sit and we can interpret that, right? We need to get that enforced, but we're putting lives in danger. This is a hazard. We're diverting operations and training from the National Guard, the people that are out there protecting the country. We're diverting them down to Nephi in some instances. Okay, every night the runway closes. Okay, the other thing that's very interesting and that I was taken back a little bit is that the Kings family filed a complaint against us with the FAA, and it's been dismissed, but they've filed appeals, and right now it's in the 10th District Court of Appeals, and right now we're under mediation with them and their attorney to solve the entire problem. So we're under mediation, yet the flagpole comes up, right? My question is, you know, what this looks like is, why do you choose the 80-foot flagpole that is closer to the end of the runway instead of the second site that they actually looked at? And to be honest, if the Coons family wanted my help to help them locate and get a site for a flagpole permitted with the FAA in a location that was safe and that we could deem it not a hazard, I'd work with them in 1 second. I have no ill will against the Coons family. I know that they are not fans of the airport or the Department of Airports, but that's not reciprocated by me. So with that, I respectfully request that the need for a conditional use be enforced. Is there any questions?
I do have one question, because it was brought up. The FAA has 45 or 48 days to submit findings. And you said they submitted this plan last summer, and yet it's dated January 25.
So the requirement is for the property owner to submit within 45 days of construction. Before 45 days of construction, the permit, the FAA then will rule on it.
So once they have a permit, then they submit that to the FAA.
No, so the FAA, the FAA does not in the 7460 check to see if there's a building permit, conditional use, anything like that, okay? They don't worry about that. What they say is if you're erecting a flagpole, within 45 days of that erection, you need to submit a permit to the FAA so they can study the airspace. And then the FAA is not the most expedient of the federal government sometimes. So sometimes it takes up to 3 months to get all back. Yeah, go ahead.
Say if the city were to say, we like the flag, not gonna do anything about it, what risk does that put us in? If something were to happen, a fire, could it be put out at night and it increase the damage that it does?
So first of all, I love the flag. I don't like the flagpole. So I just want to clarify that. What risk are you in? You haven't enforced the code. I would let the attorneys take that one. I'm just a planner. I don't process and I don't code, but I don't know liability, and I let the attorneys speak on that. Apologize.
No.
Is there like state law or something?
So right now, there's a state law that was just signed, but it was just signed in May. Okay, it was passed in January, but the governor, has to sign. And then it would be required for me, as the airport operator, to come back to you guys to pass an ordinance that protects the airport, because that is state law. It was passed in May, it's only June right now, so we'll be here shortly to do so.
Maybe you can answer this question for me. I always thought the Forest Service doesn't drop.
So they don't, but they do in the mornings and the evenings, right? So if they're traveling someplace, they will have to come back and
How
if
far
they
would, how far would they travel from the Erda airport?
I have no idea.
They go all the way to
I can't imagine they would
They
fly.
go all the way to the Uintas, they go all over.
They are also increasing their footprint currently. They've got a building permit in to build another, to put in
So I guess it doesn't make sense for me, say, from this mid-valley airport you were talking about in the other valley, for the Forest Service to fly to Willow Valley over that airport and then go to the Uinta Mountains.
Well,
Wouldn't they,
depends on where
wouldn't
their
they
bases
station
are.
themselves as close to the fire as they can?
You have to have your services there. It's like having a fire department. You gotta have all your retardant and your
We'll
mechanics.
fly out for mutual aid. So you'll have this plane will mutual aid that plane. Last Saturday, we had the island catch on fire. We pulled a helicopter out of Oregon to come fight the fire, just as he was available to win.
Just because he was the one that was available.
That's right.
There's two separate entities here too. There's the National Guard, they're at Mid Valley. There's the BLM.
South
They're
Valley.
not, so they're separate entities.
Yeah, the Guard operates out of South Valley and they'll come over and do training here because of the airspace
Right.
and the congestion. And the BLM is putting about a $7 million investment this year into that airport to build a full-on base with a building and
So all the semis are running all over there.
what was that?
All the semis coming in and out of the airport, is that what they're working on?
Most likely they're starting
Last year?
Yeah.
Today?
They're doing a road.
Oh, we as the Department of Airports are building a roadway to get to that site. And so that's what we're working on right now, and the BLM's getting the building permit. They say they want to occupy the building by July 24th next year. But anyway, thank you, appreciate it.
Mr. Coons?
Neil Coons, I live at 3808 North, 2125 West, and I'm here representing my mother, Barbara Coons, who lives at 3854 North, 2125 West. So first, I wanted to get to my arguments. I wanted to address a couple of things. Brady is correct that I did submit the notification. It's not a permit application. The FAA has no zoning authority in Erda or anywhere else. They do not have the authority. This was a notification, and I provided a notification so that they could change the flight procedures into and out of the airport based on this. And I talked to a gentleman in Texas that had done those studies, and he knew that this is a notification form, not a permitting form. The permit comes from Erda City, and I applied and got that permit. Even after I notified the city and the FAA that I was doing this, I submitted a permit and got the permit. So I followed the zoning ordinances of the authority having jurisdiction, which is Erda City. And another point is that the firefighting planes, they do just fly. I mean, from being out there, most of you know, they've flown over, they fly in the daytime. And if they have to land at night, they can land somewhere else, just like they're saying. They can come in, they borrow them from Oregon, they borrow them from others. But this is not a surprise that they've done, that this was coming. Now, I lost my train of thought. I apologize, I was gonna respond to, but the biggest thing that this is just a permit, or it's a notification, not a permit on the zoning. So I also wanted to talk to you that this is about Erda's zoning issue and any of the impacts from Salt Lake City. Oh, that's the other one. Salt Lake City is correct. I had filed a complaint. We're in the 10th Circuit Court. We went into mediation, and March 23rd, they agreed to negotiate. I have heard a zero from any of Salt Lake City on a negotiation for it. They haven't contacted me for an appraisal, they haven't contacted my attorney, nothing. So 3 months. So I'm wondering, how long do I have to wait for Salt Lake City to decide that they need the property? So now I wanted to talk to you, I've got a handout here again for you on the zoning ordinances. Sorry, Brady, I didn't know you were going to be here. I would have brought you one. So the first issue, there's a question, Terry, that you brought up, what zoning code we would be under if it was adopted for temporary county or city. You can see there, the first page, that Erda zoning ordinance went in July 22nd. I applied for the permit May 22nd, or May of 2022, and it was issued June 22nd of 2022. So I wanted to talk about the building height. So in chapter 15, it specifically calls out a building height limit. Now, the building height definition in the code says, chapter 2, item 40, building height means the vertical distance from the average finished grade surface to the highest point of the building roof or coping. The flagpole has no roof, has no coping, so it doesn't qualify for that building height limitation. Now, it also says structures apply to the height limit. So let's talk about the height limit. In chapter 28, 25(1)(b)(2), or II(b), the height shall be measured from the top of the antenna to the roof line of the building or structure. For antennas mounted set back more than 15 feet, the maximum height should be 14 feet. So the roof line's 35 feet, the antenna can be 14 feet higher. So that's 49 feet, not 35. Now the next one, the monopole, chapter 28, 28(5)(1)(c)(1), the height limit for monopoles is 60 feet in all rural residential zones. Monopoles can be 60 feet in the zones. So we have specifically called out height limitations for antennas or for specific structures. being buildings, antennas, and monopoles. But the ordinance has different height restrictions for different structures and buildings. And I submit that the structure height has not been defined in the ordinance for all structures. 3 structures, buildings, antenna, and monopoles, have been defined with the height limitation. Now, so it says the height limitation, so if you believe that the building height meets that, what is it? 35 feet, 49 feet, 60? Because there's height limitations for those structures.
How high is
It's 8 feet.
it? Exceeds all of those.
Yes. But again, there is no structure height definition for that. It specifically said a monopole at 60 feet. I'm not saying an antenna is a monopole. I mean, you have a specific definition for a monopole in that. Flagpole doesn't mean isn't a monopole.
Still exceeds all of those.
So, want to go to Utah Annotated Code 10-9A-306. And that says if a land use regulation does not plainly restrict a land use application, the land use authority shall interpret and apply the land use regulation to favor the land use application. So I believe there's an ambiguity in the ordinance, and the code says that, or the Utah code, state code, says that you need to favor me in that ambiguity in the code.
You're not concerned about any plans here?
I'm not, because the FAA has changed the procedures and has notified all the pilots through the NOTAMs procedure that they've got to avoid the flagpole, and they've noted where it is on their procedures, on their revised procedures. Now that's kind of brings me to the next one about Salt Lake City. So in their last briefing before this, we have filed an inverse condemnation suit because now they're saying that they are using my property or need my property, but specifically they have told the district court that they're not. So Salt Lake City supplemental briefing on application for preliminary injunction, page 8, I've provided it to you, second paragraph. The city's position remains that it does not physically occupy the property because it does not control flight plans, and any pilots passing over the property are governed by FAA regulations. It is not using the property insofar as it has made no attempt to enforce an easement since the dismissal of the prior case. So again, like I said 2 weeks ago, they're trying to make it your problem. I mean, I've been fighting the city for my property rights for 17 years, and we've been arguing about evaluation of it. Now they're coming in trying to say they're using it and not using it. So I think we need to hold them to what they will testify to in court. And what they'll testify to in court is that they're not using it and that they don't need an easement. And furthermore, the appellate court decision, Spec v. Big Town. A citizen does not have standing to complain about a land use ordinance to enforce an alleged zoning violation unless that person has suffered special damages. So Salt Lake City has testified, I've provided you the information there, that they're not damaged because they're not occupying the property and they're not using it, and that they don't need easement for it. So they're trying to use zoning, and they're trying to use this council to violate my Fifth Amendment rights by using the property without paying for it. So upholding that side is a violation where they're using it. So if they're not going to demonstrate special damages to this council, then they don't have standing. So I think I've provided sufficient support that the land use ordinance is ambiguous. There's sufficient evidence that Salt Lake City has not proved special damages to enforce a zoning violation. So I'm asking the council to dismiss this complaint.
Didn't your permit lapse too, wasn't it only good for 6 months?
Unless you have substantial building.
Yeah, we went over that 2 weeks ago.
We know where that haven't happened, did we come up with, it's like, as much to build a house as for flag.
I think they met their requirement, their minimums.
But I asked the airport smart questions, so I got something to ask you too.
Yeah.
Did you apply for a building permit or a structure permit?
It was a building permit, there was no structure permit in the Twilla zoning ordinance, or I would have. I looked.
It's part of my point of we're splitting hairs here.
Yep.
When you say that they should just land their planes somewhere else, how does that not adversely affect their property?
Adversely affect their property?
Yes, if they have to have airplanes that they'll in, take off, they're dropping right at dusk, and you're saying their plane should just come back and land somewhere else, not at their base airport. How does that not negatively affect their property?
Yeah, at night. But again, their flights over mine are impacting my property and my property rights. They're trespassing. So does somebody have the right to walk across your lawn at night so that they stay away from the road and don't get hit? I mean, we're talking about invading my personal property rights. That property is mine that they're flying over, that they're using. And your question is asking me, well, should we allow them to trespass? I mean, we can't
I'm
allow
asking
them.
very specifically that a 80-foot flagpole is affecting their ability to use the airport at night.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
So it is adversely affecting them. You can submit to that.
Yeah, it's adversely affecting.
All right. The other thing that you've never been able to answer yet, our code specifically calls out flagpoles as a conditional use if they're over 35 feet high. You've never applied for a conditional use permit or got a conditional use permit, so, and it calls out flagpoles specifically in that code as a conditional use permit.
Okay, let's clarify
It's the
that.
same code.
Because it does not, I would like to clarify that. Because sorry, I got it back here. Gotta go through the definitions. Bear with me a minute, because I do want to answer this question.
Take your time.
Because you're talking about paragraph 411, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh. Because I would like to read that specifically.
It's in the chart. I can't remember.
I've got here. Oh, do you have a copy? Thank you. So, it says no space above the height limit shall be allowed for purposes to provide additional, okay, sorry. The following are only exceptions which shall be allowed by conditional use to the height limits in any zone. So it says height limits, and so the only height limit in the RR zone is a building height, not a structure height. So it does not, in this exception, say penthouse or roofs for housing floors, fire or parapet walls, skylights, towers, steeples, flagpoles. It calls out that they've got to meet the height limits. But it does not say 35 feet here, and the only definition in chapter 15 for the height limit is building height. And you've defined building heights in the definitions as buildings have roofs and house people or property. And structures are flagpoles, chimneys, and others.
But is it not pretty clear that over, You're saying, it's saying if you have a flagpole, because it specifically says flagpole, over a building height, you're saying there's no building height that exists for a flagpole?
That's what I'm saying. There's not a limit on a flagpole height that's defined in the ordinance.
Wouldn't you agree that's a stretch?
I don't think so when we've got, the other ones that I've defined an antenna height as being 49 feet and a monopole as others. We've defined other structures in there. They just have dealt with codes, a lot of ordinances, and sometimes they get forgot, or they, instead of saying building height, or instead of saying structure height or structure height limit, they see building height and just assume that they mean the same thing. But again, I think according to the Utah code there, it says the plain language, or it says plainly defined. And I don't think that it has, regulation does not plainly restrict the land use. And I don't think it's plainly restricted the flagpoles to 35 feet.
Since we got the city planner here, I'd like to hear from the city.
Could you speak up? I couldn't hear.
He says, since we got the city planner here, I'd like to hear from the city planner.
Sure.
The way the code is interpreted, it may say building height, but we use that as a height restriction for anything within that zoning district. Had this permit come before me, I would have required a conditional use permit because 411 specifically states height limitations required for in excess of the height limitations, and it spells out, as he read to you, flagpoles is in there, requires a conditional use permit. We use that height limitation within the table for any structure or building within that zoning district.
Okay, that's what you use, but is that written anywhere? That's your interpretation?
Correct.
No. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
Neil, we'd like to turn some time over to John unless you have something else for us at this time.
No, that's it.
We're okay? Okay, thank you.
So let me just read to you 411, and that's the critical thing here. All buildings and structures in the definition specifically includes flagpoles, must conform to the height limit of the zoning district in which they are located. This is an RR1, so it's your 35-foot limitation. Then it says, the following are the only exceptions which shall be allowed by conditional use permits to the height limits in any zone. And it specifically talks about penthouses, et cetera, and specifically identifies flagpoles. I mean, that may not be the clearest thing in the world, but our take is that you gotta have a conditional use to have over 35 feet of flagpole. Any questions?
In your opinion, if something were to happen and we didn't enforce this, is it clear enough that we could be liable if we didn't enforce our code?
All right, I have a question. Zoning ordinances are there for a reason. Whether there'd be actual liability or not, I don't know. I'd jump up and down and say governmental immunity. We didn't have to enforce our zoning ordinances, but I can tell you that on the news, you could look with a pretty black eye and say, well, your zoning ordinance that says you have to have a conditional use. Did you have a conditional use? No. The airplane crash? Yes. Was it the fault of the flagpole? No. You know, I mean, that causation of the flagpole causing the accident is pretty tough. And that's what I'd jump on representing the city and say, heck no. Doesn't mean we wouldn't get sued.
Yeah.
We may have liability on either side.
Yeah.
Of this argument.
Well, in Salt Lake City, Salt Lake City really does not have authority to solve this problem because it's Erda. It's in Erda. The airport is in Erda and it's Erda's zoning ordinances.
I got a clarification, that's not correct. They have an eminent domain authority.
Wait, that's a different issue. It's a zoning issue. He's violating the zoning ordinance. You want to require him to get conditional use. He didn't get it. You want to pursue it. Also, you know, we might be able to even say it's a nuisance.
Some unpopular opinions. Full of them tonight.
I just need 3 to tell me which way to go.
All right, well, I'll outline my opinion and everyone else.
Is this for discussion?
We're not. We need to give our attorney direction.
We've been kicking this down the road for almost 2 months. It's not fair to the airport, it's not fair to the teams. This is 3 meetings in a row that they've been here. It's time to make a decision one way or the other.
I believe Mr. Coons is walking a very tight line. And my judgment of this situation is that he's walking it very well. I think there's a gap. Section 15-3-3, which then at the time was our temporary code adopted from Tacoma, clearly defines a building height limitation. Nothing about structures. I didn't know what a monopole was until tonight, but it's clear to me that a flagpole doesn't qualify as a monopole. Monopole is its own type of thing. 411 clearly says that you need a conditional use permit if you're going to exceed, well, all buildings and structures must be firm to the height limit of the zoning district in which they are located. It doesn't say they have to conform to the building height limit, it says the height limit. We do have a height limit, which specifically talks about buildings. Yeah, it's a little bit of a stretch, but I don't know. And like I told Kale here, I think there's liability for the city on both sides of this argument. I think if I was a judge, if I was the judge on the stand today, which I never will be, I'm thankful for that. But I might rule in favor of Mr. Coons because it's not clearly defined, and I would like to see the law clearly defined if I'm gonna have to restrict what I do.
We can't
I'm not
hear
done.
back
I'm
here.
not done. Please speak out. I do think the placement of the flagpole is completely irresponsible. I think it's very dangerous. I do think it is causing injury to the airport, having to limit when they can fly planes, and the restriction that they've had to do to limit flights at night, I don't think is an undue thing. I think it's common sense. I think that flagpole is a real danger, and I would like to see it taken down just as soon as possible. I would like to see you guys find a resolution as soon as possible. I hope you both are doing your very best. All right, unpopular opinions. Where was I going with this? Well, that's it. I think we've got liability on both sides. I think we could find ourselves on the wrong end of the argument, no matter which way we go. I've told you my opinion of the flagpole. I feel like I understand the situation and I know why it's there. I'd love to see it taken down. But I don't think we should be using the city's resources to try and enforce something that could probably be lost in a port. Who's next?
My vote, this is my vote. I forget your name, Brady. Brady, you need to get the FAA next week to come out and meet with the Coons and do this mediation. That way we solve the whole problem. That's what the Coombs want. If the FAA has said that that's what they want, I understand that they're a government agency and they move real slow, but airplanes don't. So you need to get with the FAA and get with the Coombs, and the three of you need to solve this. This is not something that a brand new city ever saw coming. It's not something that we really have resources to deal with, and it's not appropriate to say, you gotta deal with this. You gotta make the decision. You gotta decide what's right and what's wrong, when actually what's required is mediation between the FAA and the Coombs family. That's my vote.
Who's next?
Mine's causing shit. I look at what's the bigger hazard here. And for me, it's pretty simple. I'd hate to see a plane hit. To me, a loss of possible life exceeds. So that's just the way it is. I don't care, right? So I love the flag. I wish it was my place, but like I said, my more intense is the plane hit. When we've already seen that other volcano in Idaho that had a silo that got built. You wanted before about that plane crashed into stuff, so it's not like it can't happen. I just don't want it to happen.
Oh, next.
I agree with Jess, who's done a wonderful job of walking a very fine line. But I still think they fell off and didn't ever apply for a conditional use permit, and therefore their flagpole's illegal and ought to be removed.
And I have a part two. That's what I forgot to mention. In our infancy and in our inexperience, the city approved this flagpole at a higher level than was actually constructed. So when you talk about the city having liability,
No, they only gave an 80-foot permit for that one.
well, it's 80 foot, whatever it is, we approved it, knowing the height that was intended. And so there's more to it than just the fine line. We also have an approval. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a mix with Scott and Terry. I don't want to see a plane hit it. I want a fire get out of control because they can't make one last pass on a fire the evening. I think you guys need to work it out together and take you guys and us out of an unfortunate situation.
So I'd like to make things easy for John tonight.
Please.
Do you support the city taking immediate action against the Coons family today? Scott?
No.
Craig?
Yes.
I vote no.
No.
So that's 2 yeses and 3 noes. Okay. I'd like to see that decision stand until new evidence is brought about. Sound good? Okay. Maybe this will evade its way off of our agenda next 2 weeks.
I'm not gonna put it back on.
Council representative reports. You're like,
We know
you're the
got
council representative.
So, we had a discussion last week about a fence that's on, roadway, driveway. I haven't been able to catch that owner of that fence. In another matter, and I have a question for you on this, John. There's a home and a family, that needs a conditional use permit to have a mechanic shop in their house in a 1 acre zone. And I went and talked to them about it. They're doing two things. They're moving some of the cars. They've already moved about 8 of the vehicles out. They also are planning to file for a conditional use permit so that they know what parameters they've got to stay within. He's had surgery though, and it's taken him off his feet for the last 2 weeks. And here's the question for you. They had a visit from the EPA. There were 3 people there. One of them said they represented the state of Utah. One of them said they represented the county of Tooele, and the other one said they represented the city of Erda. And I wanted to know how that might happen.
Don't know.
That's what I told him. I said, I don't know who this person was.
I'm sorry, Scott, I missed the meeting. What meeting was this?
So they came to this family's home where they have kind of put a shop in their garage, a mechanic shop.
Okay.
But they came apparently looking for EPA violations. Probably a complaint from someone filed with them.
And somebody was representing Erda.
Claimed to be representing Erda.
Health department, possibly.
Erda is an area or the city?
It wasn't the health
Erda
department,
City.
but the health department, because they represent all of the county, could have been representing.
They could, that could have been the representative from Big Tooele County.
They could be your representative as well. Tooele County Health Department, Environmental Health governs.
So that would be.
We haven't approved any representation from the council.
They approve all of your
By
septic permits
statute.
and well permits
No,
and.
no, no, this person, we haven't named.
I don't know.
Okay.
That's the only way I could think.
Is the position handed down by the county? Is the city left out of it? The state?
State.
Maybe we don't have a say.
But other than that, I can't imagine who it would be.
Anyway, they didn't find anything wrong.
Then it's not an issue.
Yeah, I'm just wondering who's presenting themselves as representative of Erda City. So progress is being made there. The third issue, let's see, to put this politely, these people are becoming standoffish and don't really want to talk to me. But they managed to redefine their chicken coop so that it's less than 200 square feet. And then they don't need a building permit, correct? Correct. But it still needs to be 15 feet from property.
Still has to be setback.
And I explained to them that this is a fire hazard. But they didn't want my counsel. So,
I can't flagpole.
yeah, they said, no, this is on our property, we can build it wherever we want, Ensign Engineering told us we could build it wherever we want. I checked that, and Ensign didn't tell them that, but, so, we may have to have the fire department just go pay a visit here and say, this is a fire hazard.
So according to fire code, if you don't have a fire hydrant, it would be 25 feet. If 25 feet from a property line, you can't encumber their space. If they decide to put a residence there.
So it's
Is
25 feet.
Is it a building if it didn't require a building permit? Is it still a building? by definition?
It's a structure. Any structure.
And it can't catch fire.
In Erda City Code, is it a structure?
It doesn't matter, in Erda City Code, it doesn't matter, to movie code, it's a structure, period.
He's correct.
It does matter if we're gonna enforce something.
Fire
But you're not enforcing it either.
Fire code trumps zoning.
So, anyway, that was my end result, is we may need the fire department to just stop by there and explain the problems.
Will you send me the address?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
That's my.
On a much lighter note,
Then you have roads.
Do I have roads? Yeah, but we didn't have a, we did have a meeting, but they didn't really say anything. And when they did, they talked in circles, so it was hard to get, it's hard to figure out what they were saying. What?
Jed?
Yeah, we had a meeting with Jed, didn't we? Jed?
Yeah, I can report a little bit on that.
I thought that went pretty well.
Jed sounded very responsive to my concerns. Gave us a little guidance on things we could do if we want to fix our own potholes.
I gotta bring up something about that.
Okay, go
So
ahead.
Jess coined a new phrase, vigilante pothole repair. So citizens of Erda filling their own potholes in their house. Vigilante pothole.
Not only did the question not shock him like I thought it would, but he gave us some real advice on what to do and how to do it and how to do it the right way. I really appreciate that. Anyway, I think Jed's doing a great job for us. I do think he's doing his best to be responsive to us. My main concern was the gradual erosion of the shoulders or lack thereof on our narrow roads, and our asphalt is slowly getting, tighter and tighter. And he acknowledged it, and he said he would do something about the areas that I suggested. Those were heard away in Concord at church. Complaints can and should be made to the county roads department. On behalf of Erda, anybody can call and let them know of an issue that they are listening. Was there anything else to point out from that meeting?
Oh, yeah, they've applied for a grant, and assuming that comes through, they are gonna try and move things a little bit forward.
Like Erda Way.
Yeah, like Erda Way.
And we're talking about surface, right?
Well, I don't remember you saying that, but moving that
You're right.
project forward.
Right, he did kind of skirt that one. But he just said he would move up projects.
Right.
Okay. What else?
Got an easy fun one. Me and Jess met with Rocky Mountain Power. They do have a small grant that they want to give. They're willing to give anyone we say. It's for
Willing to consider, what we say.
Community outreach, yeah.
Because we as a city, we can't come up with a direct use for this $1,000.
Yeah. Well, he said we can give it to the city and you can buy chairs if you want for fire station or tables.
Maybe we can.
But that's not exactly what the grant's for. We had considered and thought of Erda Days, hadn't given to them, but Erda Days doesn't have an ability to take the money because they are not a nonprofit or an LLC.
John, how does that work? If we took that money to buy like prizes or do somewhere, we didn't hand actual money to them, just like a prize or something. Don't they be in trouble?
It's still a gift, or it's taxable.
The fire station will be more than happy
I got a check here already. Yeah.
Just saying.
So one of the things we talked about.
There you go.
And they were supportive of was maybe giving it to the ballpark, which is a nonprofit with tax number
and they can do a clean energy thing like that, like LED lights or something.
They have all kinds of places they can pay the power bill and in Rocky Mountain put a banner up. Hey, these lights brought to you tonight by Rocky Mountain Power. But before we did that and put them together to give them that money, thought we better bring it to the council and let everyone decide where that best use of that money.
I can't think of a better one. All cars are great.
I couldn't come up with anything that was better, but I didn't want to hear Eric's thoughts.
Ballpark's fun.
Sounds good to me.
All right, I will get those in contact, get that taken care of.
General comments? Or do we have any more reports? 9:10.
Will we adjourn it?
Second.
And moving to second, we adjourn this meeting. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you very much.
This must be yours. No. That's the entire bid of the pit.
I got it all in Greece.
Yeah, I have
memorized.